Welcome everyone to the Art Fisher podcast. Here today we have our three components of the podcast. I'm Reese Fisher.
I'm Nolan Fisher.
And I'm Jackson Fisher. Jackson McDermott.
Welcome to the podcast, Jackson. Jackson will be our third component of the podcast, and as we're continuing our foray into movies, the topic today is gonna basically be around why do we sit down and watch movies? At least for me, I usually sit down and watch a movie, which has become somewhat increasingly more difficult just because I have a long list of movies that I would like to watch. But I usually think about either the mood that I'm in or how I would like to challenge my own idea of a movie just by watching like a horror movie or like a period piece, something like that. So for me, it kind of depends on, what I'm in the mood for or interested in, or if I want to like challenge myself with what I'm watching.
Yeah, I think something that gets me on the couch is pretty similar. Is like it depends on my mood and like if I'm watching with other people. Something that is difficult is that me and my wife, we don't have the same taste in movies, and she just wants to sit down and not really think or anything like that. So the type of movie that she watches or wants to watch is completely different from someone like me who, watches it to actually get enjoyment out of it and think and all those things. So it's a little bit different. So it's tougher to watch like the better quality movies that I typically enjoy if I'm watching with her. So it's a little bit of a balancing act.
Oh yeah, that's a problem I have all the time. Is a lot of the movies I want to watch are old, black and white, and in another language, and slow, which are just all the things that nobody wants when they want to sit back and relax. Like, oh, I have to read and I have to process because it's a different language that I'm reading, and it's boring, and there's no color.
Yeah, I guess that was probably also what I was thinking of when I said like challenging what I think of as a movie, because the more movies you watch, then it broadens your perspective on, oh wow, you mean to tell me there's more movies out there than just like American movies or British movies? Like it probably depends on your own experience with watching movies, but for the most part, I think a lot of our own trajectories of film watching is probably very similar nowadays. But at the same time, I think that kids nowadays also, they might have a different take on movie watching. I think there are more people nowadays that, as you said, Jackson, that kind of approach movies in that capacity. It's just, I'd like to turn my brain off. I just want to kind of relax and just like, I mean, life is hard, right? Right now, like, there's definitely a time and place for that, but yeah, it kind of depends on like your approach to wanting to watch it.
Well, there can still be stuff that's like, I don't know that I would say challenging is the right word, but darker content that just the general population gets really into. Like a lot of the TV sphere that's been really popular in the last 10 years, which I guess technically isn't movies, but the budgets basically make the movies, like Breaking Bad, Mad Men. Like those are character driven dramas. They just have shells around them that vaguely make them more appealing to the masses. But Game of Thrones is like shockingly violent, like fairly dark throughout, and everybody loved that, at least most of it.
Yeah, it's like, how do you dress up the movie in order to make it more digestible or more quote unquote accessible? That's a fun word people like to throw around with movies. Oh, that movie was super inaccessible. I've definitely seen movies that are that way, but not as many as I think people deem them to be inaccessible. For foreign movies, especially, I really appreciate them. The one thing that I had to get over and like get past was subtitles, which for me, as someone who has like a pretty like low attention span, it's hard for me to concentrate on a movie with the subtitles constantly changing. So it's kind of jarring for me, honestly. Like when I watch a movie, I really like to kind of like sit back and take it all in as this like moving canvas, and this canvas that's being altered in whatever way the director wants to do it. So I guess for someone who is not familiar with foreign movies, I would strongly recommend sort of like breaking through that barrier, that wall, to watch them, because I would probably say I enjoy more foreign movies than quote unquote Western movies.
Yeah, I think the barrier is really tough to kind of break through initially. Kind of what you're saying, like it takes a lot. It's just it's a completely different experience when you watch something and you have to like read subtitles with it. But definitely is super enjoyable. And I feel like with like the advent of like Netflix and HBO, or I guess just putting things more online, it's just everything is so much more accessible. So you get a lot of content from a lot of different countries. Like I've been into watching like Korean films, which has been like really enjoyable, or watching like Spanish TV shows, which is also like I've really enjoyed that.
What kind of Korean movies? Like drama or horror
Uh,
or
I guess both. Yeah, typically I guess a lot. There's been like a lot of like horror stuff, but then also there have been like some drama ones that I've enjoyed. Um, I think the latest one, which was like actually like a fusion between like Korean, Japanese, and US, is from a book called Pachinko on HBO. And it was kind of cool the way that they did the subtitles, because they would, for English it would be white colored, for Korean it would be yellow, and then for Japanese I think it was blue. So you could see like the language changes, and you could see like how they would do it with the different subtitle coloring.
and you would recommend that?
I think it was a better book than it was a film, or a TV show actually. It was one of the ones that me and my wife kind of met in common ground to sit back and watch for. I don't think I would necessarily recommend. I thought the viewing experience was fun. I thought the story was pretty cool, but I probably wouldn't recommend it.
Why?
You're disagreeing with an 8.4 out of 10 on IMDb, Jackson.
Yeah, no, I thought it was good. I think that I think if your mood is right, it's enjoyable. But it's not one of the ones that I would go back and say like, oh yeah, this is one that I really recommend. Like it's my top, I don't know, top 50 or whatever the criteria is for recommending something to someone. It's something that like if someone brought it up, I would have a conversation about, but not something that like is on my top one. And kind of like what you were saying, Reese, like there's so many other movies that are on the list, that I think are higher up that I would try to get other people to watch versus starting with Pachenko.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I'm my interest has been piqued just from what you said. I'd probably want to read the book, especially since that's what you recommended. I think that kind of goes also to how I sort of, my filtration system for films is, if someone recommends it to me, then I'm like way more likely to watch it than something that I find on my own, which is, I guess, also maybe similar in music, just because I really like finding new music. I like finding new movies, but then I've also feel like I've been burned a number of times where I'm like, oh, if you like this artist, you might like this artist. If you like this movie, you might like this movie. And then you watch like the movie or whatever it is that's supposed to be something you would like, and it's just like a direct like rip off of some other director, and it's like a pretty movie or like it's a visceral movie, but then there's like very little substance behind it, like almost like no soul to it. At least I've experienced that a number of times.
Oh yeah, I would definitely rather watch a movie with like a really, really low production that ends up being a trashy movie where Like, it's clearly everyone involved is passionate about it. Rather than, like, you know, a $200 million movie where you can see the actor rolling his eyes, like, in the take. Like The Rock, other than The Rock, who's just fully committed to every movie they cast him in. But like those Fast and Furious movies, like Ludacris is just in the background, like I'm here to make $10 million and that's it. Every so often they give him a line about, I used to be a locksmith for 40 years.
Just to remind you why he's there.
I mean, you see that in plenty of like every year BBC makes 10 really stuffy period piece movies, and half the actors are like super into it. Like they're like, this is a new rendition of Shakespeare and it's super important. And the other half are just sleeping their way through the line, just bored.
Do you think we're approaching a time where people, like, there are more movies that are coming out that are like that? Where people, like, there are more actors sleeping their way through movies than before? Or is that more a symptom of, like, there's just more content being created? So therefore there will just be more of them sleeping their way through the movies.
There might be a few more now. The industry's all weird because it's like been broken up and resegmented, and they're still shuffling people around trying to figure out where talent lands at a different streaming service. So like all of the top actors and all of the top like people behind the camera all have projects they've been trying to do for 20 years. So they have like a bidding war on their hands, but the productions are slow and expensive. So instead of being able to like go in and just make a movie every year the way they used to, now it's like, oh, one movie is going to take 3 to 4 years just to see from start to finish. And it takes 2 to 3 years for them to actually get things rolling with any one studio. So even though there's more being made, it's like everyone at the top is making them slower. And that sort of works its way down and then back up. So a lot of new people will come and make a series of movies in a row. Like you'll see one actor who just explodes onto the scene, and then you see them everywhere. They're in like 8 big projects, and then they disappear as they become more famous. They get more selective, and then they choose what they're making. And I think just in general, that system hasn't adjusted yet to essentially the full transition to digital, where like the streaming services will be making everything. Because the only movies that are really being released in theaters now, like across, at least globally, are only being made by like 5 studios. Most things are getting like limited releases, which there's still that infrastructure in America and I guess across the rest of the world. But
yeah, because at the end of the day, most movies are going to take a lot of money to make, which brings me to another question, which is is that I don't really have a question around this. I guess it's more so a point, but obviously because it costs so much, it gets back to the capitalist system, which is you have to figure out who to sign to your movie in order to attract enough money so that the people who are investing in the movie recoup the investment and then some. I mean, a shining example of this is what's that guy's name? Michael Bloom or George Bloom? Blumhouse Productions.
Jason Blum.
Yeah.
Blumhouse, man.
Yeah, the Blumhouse Productions, where he basically looks for scripts, and he has his like 3 rules of investing in a movie, which is basically that it takes place nearly all in one location. The other one is there's not too many speaking parts, and then you pay talent as little as legally possible. And that's like a guaranteed method of, it's kind of like stocks. Like you just pay like a measly like pittance for like a few stocks, and then if one of them makes it big, then bam, you've got it.
Yeah, but producers like him have always existed. Like just people who are there basically to turn it into a business. The fact that he has hit on some certain like specific projects is just luck on his end. Like, the fact that Get Out is a Blumhouse movie has nothing to do with him.
Right. I'm not faulting him either for it. I'm more so saying that, like, just the whole industry is set up this way where if you have a big budget movie, then you're choosing between these 12 actors and you have to make the correct decision in order to bring home a certain amount of money.
Oh yeah, I see what you're saying. That the hyperinflation on the top end is making it so there's no middle ground. Because there's still tons of small budget movies. There's just very few mid-budget movies. Like, they don't make movies in the like $20 million to $80 million range, which quote unquote mid-budget. Like, well, a lot of those mid-budget movies, like well into the 90s and 2000s, were starting to decline because the sales for DVDs and VHS tapes were declining. And those sales now are like almost entirely gone. Like, what we have now with 4K and Blu-ray is nowhere near enough sales to recoup the losses on the back end of something that didn't do well in theaters. So a lot of those mid-budget movies they used to make that made up like the overwhelming market of like total output for major studios just disappeared in the matter of, 10 years. And it was kind of replaced by streaming studios who could make the same type of movie for 1/10 the cost. But the quality went really far down, at least in my opinion.
How much of people's decisions to choose to watch a movie is based on how successful that movie has been?
I have no idea, because Netflix doesn't share its user data very well.
Yeah, that's true. It does seem rather skewed and nonsensical.
Well, I don't know if there's a correlation between Netflix listing something as number one watched on their website and then it getting more, it continues to amass more views over the day just because it says it's number one.
I would think it does, just because you don't have to hunt for it. It's just right there, and you're like, oh, a bunch of people watch this. It's probably good. Bam.
You don't think most people just get on Netflix and then doom scroll until they just helplessly pick something at random? Or you think they just go to the first, they're like, this is the most popular one, I'm just going to click on that?
Well, there's that, but then there's also that, like, people have heard of it through word of mouth, and they're like, oh yeah, my coworker was just talking about this. Let me check this out. There's that, and then there's also the horrifying shuffle button on Netflix, which is just give me something to feed my my brain. Just feed me.
I think you're also missing out on the whole like Netflix's like recommendation thing, right? Like, so like
Yeah.
if besides like the top 10, if they're looking for a certain genre and they just show you like 10 movies or whatever, like I'm sure that drives up clicks like crazy. Some of the stuff that I've really enjoyed are the ones I've had to like dig for, which takes a really long time to do. And I don't know, it's not always not always worth the amount of time investment to have to do it.
Well, it used to be, before I ever used like Roku or any other like Blu-ray player or Amazon Fire Stick, like any of those like pod devices meant to be hooked up to a TV. Like if you're just using your phone, like Netflix in a browser, you can just manually type in like all those hidden categories. Because Netflix only shows you like these 8 categories exist, but then they have, I don't know, hundreds of them built into their website, and you can just manually type them in and it'll show you results that you won't normally get because they're either hidden intentionally by Netflix or unintentionally because no one's watching them. I didn't really have a point with that other than that Netflix should just release all of those categories on their app, but
open source your algorithm, Netflix.
Or at least share customer data.
Yeah, there's just like zero incentive for them to do that, but yeah, I agree. I don't really even watch Netflix that much anymore. It's usually, I mean, I'm watching Dark right now, which just happens to be on Netflix, and I'll probably watch the director's next series that comes out. But I primarily only watch like comedies on there, and whatever if they just happen to have a movie that's on there that someone recommends.
Where do you find your stuff if you're not using Netflix?
I have a list of about like 150 movies that I would like to watch, and so I just like go through that, and I'm like, oh, it's on whatever app, and that's where I watch it. And the way I built that list is mostly, I would say 85% of those is simply just from me talking with Nolan and having some idea of a movie, and then he'll just randomly be like, oh yeah, I saw that movie like 5 years ago, you should definitely watch it. So I'm like, all right, well, it's on there now. At least for me, like the two, I wasn't even planning on talking about this, but the two services that I enjoy most with watching movies is Canopy and Criterion Collection. Those two are incredible for, I guess you could say them like, or you could call them challenging movies. Like movies that just are different from other movies you've seen. They have a lot of foreign films. They have a lot of, I guess most people nowadays would call them ancient movies. Yeah, they have a lot of older films on there as well, but the content on there is like really, really high quality. Not all of it, obviously. They have a lot of stuff, but
yeah, Criterion fits into that like curated category. Like they're curating the content specifically before it even gets to you. What were you saying, Jackson?
No, I was just say, yeah, I haven't played around with these sites, so I'm definitely going to add it to my list because I've been doing like the classic dance of jumping through a bunch of streaming services using accounts from other people,
Yeah.
and or I guess just buying the movie on Prime or whatever. So always up for
you're gonna be locked out of those accounts now.
yeah.
How do you put that out there?
Oh yeah, good point. Yeah, good thing I said my name's Jackson Fisher, so they can't come after me.
Yeah, they were
always 3 steps ahead, Jackson.
They were allegedly gonna do the password sharing crackdown on Netflix, but I haven't heard anything about it.
I think it's too hard. Like other than limiting the amount of devices that are on, like it's tough with everyone like traveling around, and then I mean using like I have my computer I'm on now, I have my PC, I have my Mac, I have my phones, I have like everything, traveling around and stuff. I feel like it's really tough to, I don't know, limit that, especially people who want to use like a VPN or like hide some of their identity stuff.
Yeah. Or just the fact that like Netflix is allowed to be shared by like 2 to 3 people. So how do you differentiate between the 2 to 3 who are actually paying for it versus the 4 people who piggyback off the back end?
Yeah.
It makes sense why. Like they just want everyone who uses Netflix to individually pay for a subscription because they're hemorrhaging money as they lose subscribers. But maybe all the lost Twitter followers will spend all their time on Netflix. Netflix can add like a live streaming ability where you can just, it'll be like Twitch, and it'll just be messages and comments over the movie that you can toggle on or off as just other people watching it live.
Horrifying. Don't give them any ideas.
Netflix is like already having trouble keeping some filmmakers on the platform because they're angry their movies are being watched on smartphones. So
that was actually what I was just going to bring up, is that there's obviously there are people that are more purist in that approach where you have to use, I wouldn't say they have dimensions down of how big the screen needs to be, but something larger than a phone to watch a movie on, right? I guess I would probably consider myself to be in this category because I don't I don't watch movies on my phone. I think they should be watched on as big of a screen as possible if you're watching like a quote unquote film, right? But yeah, there are more people watching movies on phones than ever before because more people have phones than ever before and they're available on them. It's not really good or bad. It's just kind of is. In addition to that, obviously more people are watching content than ever before, but I want to know, I don't really have that many discussions about movies on like a daily basis or a weekly basis. Sometimes I do with my students every now and then if they recommend something to me or I recommend something to them, but I wish that people thought about movies more. I don't know how else to say that without sounding like pretentious, but like I just love having discussions about movies and rewatching a movie with like a new perspective or finding a new movie and then talking about it. I just think that like people are watching movies and they're like, oh yeah, that was a good movie. Or I hated that movie. Oh, what did you hate about it? I hated it. That guy in that movie, he did something 70 years ago that was bad. So I hated that movie.
Oh, well, yeah, it would be much, like, you could get a lot more out of life if every conversation you had was not just based on, like, a knee-jerk reaction, and it was the way someone was thinking through why they felt a certain way. But you can't, like, tell people to watch a movie and then, write a 15-page essay talking about what they thought about the character's transformation or something.
Actually, Reese, you can do that though when you're in for your students, right?
Yeah, he can do that. So you can force your students to do this all day.
If any of them are listening, they will find you. They will not be pleased with that suggestion. No, I don't think that's the answer either. It's more so like that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast and start this podcast is that just talking about them and coming up with these ideas on the fly, having a space, as you stated, Nolan, in the first episode, to think about these things, I think is really important. And I guess what I'm driving at is I think that people may not be doing that as often, like making a space where you have time to think and you have time to sort of weigh out how you feel about something and why you feel it. Because that's ultimately when you discover things, is when you give yourself time and space.
Well, yeah, there might be something about the access to a massive amount of content that makes it impossible to, watch something and then sit back afterward and consider what you just saw. Rather than, using, I don't know what apps, I think people primarily use Letterboxd in this space. Or they use, I guess they could use IMDb or something else, but you watch the movie, you rate it, and then you just go on to whatever the next thing is, if it's scrolling or not. Or you're just scrolling the whole way through a movie. Like, why keep your attention on one thing when you can just release all the dopamine at once all the time?
I had a funny situation when I saw Dune in IMAX, actually. This was, I guess, 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, whenever it was it came out. I was sitting there and there were these two girls and they were talking through the preview, like pretty loudly. They were like giggling and stuff, like the previews, which was fine. The movie starts, so Dune, with the music and everything, they're still talking like 3 minutes into it and they're like a few seats down from me and I like just look over at them, lean over and just like pretty loudly say like, the movie's a lot better if you just watch it. And they both just like turned and looked at me and then just shut up and didn't say anything the whole rest of the movie. And I was like, good. Like, just watch the movie. You paid all this money to see a movie in IMAX and you're just going to sit there and giggle or like be on your phone? Like, what?
Well, it's fun. There are definitely a lot of great theater experiences for movies. Like when the theater is full. Like I remember I saw Get Out in the theater. The theater was basically packed. And like when you watch a horror movie like that, just the way that the entire room can stay silent, and then either like that movie obviously has a triumphant ending, so like people are cheering by the end, but you end up with people being like, oh shit, when there's a jump scare or something, or like everyone audibly is spooked or jumps at the same time. I think like one I saw around the same time as that was A Quiet Place, which is like a pretty good movie. It's not amazing, but it was awesome in the theater, and it was awesome to see with several hundred other people, versus some movies that are just slow and they don't necessarily engage the audience in such a suspense driven way. Like I watched Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. This is probably like 10 years ago in the theater, and people were like, you could tell they were bored out of their tears. Like it's just a really dry British period piece thriller. And so people were standing up and getting out. Like some people were leaving early because it was just too boring. So it's weird that the whole medium is released all in the same way, or at least it was. Now, of course, we can watch it on our phone or on a TV or a computer at the same time it's released in theaters. But some movies are inherently going to be really good in theaters and some aren't. Like, I wouldn't want to watch Dunkirk outside of theaters. Like, it's all about an immersive experience. Like, you want to feel the jet engines, but you can't really get that feeling on if you're watching it on your phone, it's just a small screen. You have your headphones on, but you don't feel the sound the same way you do when you have those massive Panasonic speakers or whatever in the theater.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. One movie that was really funny to watch in theaters was The Wolf of Wall Street, just because there was this one couple that was way too old to be watching that movie. Like, not like too young, but they were just like ancient. And it was probably like the 17th F word of the film, something like that, which was, only like
that was 2 minutes
five minutes into the movie, after the scene where he's getting topped off driving down the highway, and they both just got up, big huffs, big sighs, and then like stormed out. And they weren't the last ones to leave either, but that was so funny. Meanwhile, everyone else in the audience was like laughing that people were leaving, because it was such a fun experience in the theaters. But yeah, there is definitely something to be said for watching movies in theaters, which is kind of cool too, that I think there are more movies now that are like reviving older films as well to show them in theaters. And I wish there were more theaters that did that too, but obviously it comes down to, are you making money on that? But
yeah, ultimately, if theaters aren't doing well, I don't think it's inherent that it's because movies coming out now are less good or less interesting. People are just less likely to pay $10 to go to the theater when we already pay $10 for 2,000 movies at home. Or you can just rent any movie on Amazon for half the price of a theater ticket.
And have all the food in the world at your disposal.
Yeah,
Alcohol,
and you don't
too.
have yeah, exactly. They don't serve beer in a lot of American theaters. They don't have any sommeliers going around with wine. They should. That's how you revitalize the theaters. You just make it an all-in experience. You get dinner.
You get wined and dined.
Yeah, exactly.
When I was living in Boston, they would periodically play The Room at like one of this like old school theaters, and it'd get like a pretty big like cult following of people who'd go and watch The Room, which was like a super fun
football.
experience. Yeah. Horrible movie, but it was like it was a fun experience when people really got into it, which was really cool.
Yeah, I wish that, it may just be that I don't live in a city, so I don't know about them, but I wish there was more of like a midnight movie circuit. Just smaller theaters that do a lot of like select events on a weekly basis. That all eventually devolve into stuff like The Room, where people are throwing footballs at the screen. And I know people, I think it's still pretty popular that theaters will do like Rocky Horror Picture Show. That's like a yearly thing for people at Halloween, but that's like a really specific crowd of people who get really into that movie. I don't know if either of you have seen Rocky Horror Picture Show.
I actually have not. No, I've been meaning to watch it for a while.
It's just like a really goofy, campy comedy movie.
Starring Tim Curry.
Yeah.
A legend.
But since Tim Curry like cross dresses, it's a huge movie for the queer community.
Right. Right.
To be fair, that is a big part of the movie, so it does make some sense, but
So back to the original question posed about a half hour ago, which was what is it that we want to get out of movies? Like, I guess in order to rephrase the question, I'm not saying we have to answer it. I'm thinking about it as well. I don't have a distinctive answer, but sometimes I sit down and watch a movie and I think it's going to go one way, and then it completely inverts it on me. And I think some of those experiences are some of the best, or even the better ones is that I try not to know anything about the movie going into it, just because it does mess with my experience. Like, I like to be surprised by it. I like my emotions to be like fully immersed, and I don't really want any preconceived notions going in to it. Even knowing like the rating on IMDb sometimes can mess with like my own perspective of a movie or going into it. So I guess if I tried to answer that, like I want to have some level of experience that makes me feel something, challenges what I believe in, or makes me like see the world in a different way, or like reminds me of a very important lesson or a very important time in my life that I may have forgotten about, like a touchstone. Like, there are a few movies that I would probably put into a category as like touchstone pieces. Like It's a Wonderful Life could be one. You know, it's a Christmas movie. A lot of people will watch it on like a yearly basis, and it reminds you to not take your life for granted. But there are a lot of movies as well that you could consider to be like touchstones, but that's just one thing that I would look for in a movie, some type of lesson or making you feel a certain way, blowing you away.
oh yeah, I'm sure nostalgia is like a main driver for the reason people watch stuff. That's why Disney's made a killing over the last 10 years just remaking popular animated films as live action or pseudo live action in the case of stuff like The Jungle Book or The Lion King, because those are just, shot for shot remakes, and that ends up being just an enjoyment further of fantasy, because these stories are just about talking animals, but also just hitting the nostalgia dopamine button over and over again. So like the same way that you might get something out of It's a Wonderful Life, being reminded, yearly that you shouldn't take it for granted, then you just have people who want to be reminded about The Circle of Life or whatever other Lion King song is their favorite.
I like the one where the hyenas are marching to Scar.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to be like overly critical of Disney. It's just frustrating that that's where they've made a killing, is just this a lot of the superhero movies that end up being formulaic versus just complete copied remakes, just in a different visual style.
Or with a different cast.
Yeah.
I think that's like another thing with like movies that are coming out. They're following like that Disney method of like what's the lowest amount of effort that we can put into this and crank out as much money as possible, and it works. It's worked for, like you're saying, it's worked on The Lion King. It's worked on all the Marvel movies, all the superhero movies, and I feel like we're just being thrown a bunch of movies that fit that model, which is not the most exciting.
Well, every time, like, I can empathize with a lot of these big studios that don't want to do it, because every time they put their neck out and risk more money on, like, an original project, audiences don't flock to see it. So it's like the audiences have spoken for what they want to see. Like the people willing to go to theaters mostly just want to see a big CGI mess play out, either for the whole movie or, at least the last 45 minutes.
I just want to see Howard the Duck. Give me Howard the Duck.
They already made that.
I know, that's what I'm saying. That speaking of a movie that they stuck their necks out for, and Howard's neck
That is a different.
did not come through.
Have you seen that movie?
No.
It's not only is it historically bad, it's also just like grossly offensive.
Oh God.
And
I
just,
did not know
and
that.
just gross in general. Like it's like a duck puppet with CGI, but it's from the 80s. So the puppet doesn't really match the CGI, and the CGI is really, really outdated. And then the movie itself is just gross. Like the duck is like masturbating several times and like fucks a human woman. Yeah.
Oh my.
Yeah, it's a messed up movie.
Wow. No wonder why it wasn't revitalized. I know Marvel was kicking around that idea.
Well, they threw it in as an Easter egg in some movie somewhere. But I don't know if they were actually going to do it as a movie. It's hard to tell.
I don't know.
What?
No, I was just saying I didn't know how the Duck was an actual movie, and I looked it up, and that is pretty crazy. It's like what Ted tried to do, but like I guess did it better.
Yeah, because Ted is like one consistent tone. Like it's a rom-com and a buddy duo comedy. So like, and those things play well together as it's like the friend finally breaks away from his old buddy to get married, but his friend is a gross teddy bear who's CGI. Whereas Howard the Duck is like supposed to be a superhero, but then they make him a weird pervert, and then they make the villain a weird pervert. And then in between is just all this other nonsense.
Why do you think we're living in a time that's like a comedy graveyard? Like I can't remember the last time there was like a solid comedy that came out, except from like the early 2000s, maybe early 2010s. Like I haven't seen one that's as iconic as, I don't know, like Wedding Crashers or like Anchorman or something like that. Like it's been a while.
Because comedies for like by and large are mid-budget movies, so to afford a lot of the top comedians, the budget of the movie has to be, bigger than 10 million or 15 million. So it fits into that category of movies they just don't make anymore. At least that's part of it. The other reason is comedians, all have their own fan bases like locked down on various platforms. So they're less incentivized to ever even do movies. And the ones who do are technically making comedies. Like it seems like it, but then I think they end up just being really small budget movies that few people see. I guess we'll find out with this that Bert Kreischer movie. I don't know how large the budget is, but
there definitely should be a movie that comes out that Tim Dillon is just the protagonist, and he's like a protagonist that assumedly is this like really normal guy who's super fit, and he gets away with being a jackass because he's just super good looking, but then it's just Tim Dillon being himself. I would pay to see that. Like just throw Tim Dillon in Top Gun. I would love to see something like that.
I think he's not a very good actor, so he's lost out on a lot of auditions for movies he's tried to be in.
He's self-admittedly not a great actor.
Yeah.
Like he said, it's hard for him to be anything except himself, which is not necessarily a bad thing, honestly, because Tim Dillon is hilarious.
I don't know. I guess it's worked maybe before, but I think people have a lot of nostalgia for periods of time where comedy movies were doing well, but they weren't necessarily good. Like American comedies were just like a third of all the production for movie history up until like the 50s when they went through all the like McCarthyism and kicking out communists. They kicked out a bunch of comedians because comedy was a communist thing in the 50s. And then I don't know that it ever really recovered. Like the 70s has a bunch of cult hits, but they weren't that popular when they came out. And looking back on them now, a lot of them haven't aged very well. Like stuff like Animal House or Caddyshack.
Yeah, parts of Animal House are pretty rough. Still a funny movie, but yeah, pretty rough.
I don't know. As for like how you really see them going away, like there were a bunch of great comedies made, I guess, just by like the Coen brothers, and Adam McKay was involved in a lot of them. So if you look at what they're making now, they just either haven't made anything recently, or like Adam McKay's last movie just wasn't very funny.
The Joker?
No, the Don't Look Up.
Oh, God. Yeah.
I don't know, maybe life itself is too funny to try to satirize, at least in narrative form.
It seems like we're approaching a time where like the irony is like just too high with so many different systems, and probably in a lot of people's waking life, it's just a really, really high level of irony that I guess maybe if you continue to acknowledge or remind people of, they'll just get sad. I don't know.
Or people are just satisfied with the amount of comedy they're getting from the existing movies they're watching. Since people are like the most popular movies are these kids movies, they have comedy in them. It's just really juvenile humor. Not necessarily juvenile to the point of like fart jokes, although I'm sure some of that exists. But you know what I mean? Like all the Marvel movies have one distinct type of humor in them, which is kind of meant for a 12-year-old.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I just downloaded Watchmen on my Kindle, which I can't wait to read that on the iPad because the graphics are pretty sweet on that. Not that that's similar to Marvel, but you know, superheroes.
Honestly, reading Watchmen semi predicts how much we would become obsessed with Marvel and Marvel superheroes.
Yeah, from the little that I know about it, because I only saw bits and pieces of the movie that came out. Thankfully, I did not watch that whole thing. Tip of the hat to Zack Snyder. Yeah, it seems to be pretty spot on in a lot of ways. And then you have stuff like The Boys that's out now as well. Which, like, I go back and forth, like, every episode of The Boys, of like, oh, I like the show. Oh, I'm not that big a fan of the show. Oh, I like it again. I'm not that big a fan.
Yeah, it's the way it chooses to leave a bad taste in your mouth that sometimes feels very satisfying because you enjoy hating superheroes, and then at the same time it does too many of the cliches that you don't want, and then either subverts them or doesn't. Just all over the place.
And then you're left wondering, am I just watching a Marvel spinoff? Like, did this director just not get a chance at making a Marvel movie, so then they made The Boys? Because sometimes it feels that way. I know personally, sometimes I get in the mood to watch specifically like a black and white movie. There was one movie that I saw pretty recently. It's something like A Girl Named Tuesday or something like that. Forget what it's called. But that movie was pretty enjoyable.
Oh yeah, I think you were telling me about that.
But anyway, like, yeah, sometimes I get in the mood to watch like a black and white movie. Like it might be something to do with the overall aesthetic or the dialogue of those, the overall like tone and feeling that you have when you watch it. But I don't know how many people nowadays are watching black and white movies.
I have no idea. I just, like, anecdotally know most people would prefer not to watch black and white movies because they're vaguely less visually interesting.
As I say, I think it's a generational thing. Like I feel like our parents would be a lot, or people in our parents' generation would be a lot more willing to watch black and whites, but our generation and the generation below, I feel like it's not stimulating enough.
Yeah, at times I definitely have seen black and white movies in my brain. Just I need to continually override it wanting to look at something else because it's not moving fast enough for me. It's called His Girl Friday, by the way.
His Girl Friday.
Directed by Howard Hawks, starring Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell.
Gotcha.
It was not a very long movie. It was really enjoyable. The dialogue was punchy. Yeah, I think for me, like, the black and white movies, one thing I appreciate about them a lot is they seem to have, like, at least the strong ones that I've seen, they seem to have really strong dialogue. I mean, also shot choices are, we talked about this before, Nolan, but shot choices play like a huge role in a movie. They're arguably the most important item when creating a film. But yeah.
Yeah, I guess part of it is as, like, movies have evolved to sort of move faster. Like, just the feel of them moves faster. Like, there's more cuts usually. Like, it just
I know what you mean.
Like, I've heard it referred to before as, like, the attention economy, but basically the attention economy is centered around largely immediate gratification, not long-term plots. So TV has largely overtaken viewership than, like, casual watching of movies, because it's just so much more convenient to dip out after one episode, even though you could go and watch, 4 or 5 episodes in a row, the length of a long movie.
It's funny you mention that because I'm showing The Social Dilemma to my 10th grade classes right now because we finished 1984. Sorry, I didn't have my mic. We finished 1984, so we're watching The Social Dilemma, which they touch on the attention economy. I think that's a huge piece of what people are watching nowadays and how people's attention is being sucked by their phone, like, so much of the time. So they associate their phone with entertainment. So anything entertaining, they're like, oh, why wouldn't I just use my phone?
Well, part of that you might be able to attribute to a lot of, like, modern day classic filmmakers like Spielberg and Scorsese, who, even though they have, like, a bunch of just stuffy long dramas under their belt, they've also both made, like, faster paced movies, or movies that seem to push the tilt towards, more edits, more cuts, more change. Like, Goodfellas is, like, over 30 years old now, and it feels slow in comparison to, like, The Wolf of Wall Street. But those are both, like, really fast-paced movies, and movies have moved faster pace even since Wolf of Wall Street, which was, like, 10 years ago. And I don't even think, like, I only mention that because, like, The Social Dilemma is, what I get the most out of it is that the infrastructure that a lot of the, like, social media tech developers, like, the problem they ran into and why they quit was because they built something they didn't understand and couldn't control, with the only goal being to keep attention as long as possible. So it's the same way with, like, how these movies seem to be, getting quicker and quicker. The rate of attention has to be higher. Like, you have to be more interesting and faster moving all the time. I think that was just an accident, like, for both movies and obviously the rate of dopamine in which we get from just scrolling around on the phone. More so than, like, The Social Dilemma kind of makes the whole thing into, like, you have to be careful or your kid will become a Nazi.
Right. That also typically, what you're talking about, the symptom that movies fall into, it typically hurts the story. Because people's attention is so shot now that they're constantly looking for that next hit of dopamine, or just to be completely overwhelmed by the shattering of glass from a bullet or an explosion or something, that the story, I think, for me, it seems to be consistently harmed. But maybe that's too general.
Maybe. Like, TV is still popular, so people can get some gratification out of long-term plots. Like, people can watch 10 episodes and still follow, how a character moves between years worth of time throughout the narrative.
Right, I more so meant for movies.
Well, the new Black Panther movie is like almost 3 hours long. It's like 2 hours and 45 minutes.
Right, I think that's a little bit of a different case, but...
Yeah, because the movie is designed, it's an action movie meant to keep you engaged the whole time, but...
And pay homage as well.
Oh, you mean that people are watching it just because Chadwick Boseman died, or...
I'm not saying just because he died, I'm saying that plays a factor into it.
Oh, yeah, and I'm sure it's actually a part of the... I haven't seen it, but I'm sure that's a big part of the movie. It's like, there's going to be some funeral scene and characters really deeply upset.
I'm excited to watch it. Is that on your end, Nolan?
Yeah. Yeah, it's growing.
That's okay.
Yeah, I figured it would eventually get louder. Could only keep the excitement in for so long after that Qatar game.
I do think that there are more people that are falling under the idea that, I don't want to watch a movie because it's 2 hours. Right? Like, people do have busy lives, but then also when they have time or downtime or what have you, they have blocks of time that they're less likely to set aside that time for a movie. So then inherently, if they are seeking a movie, it's going to be a movie that gives them that downtime, kind of like what Jackson was saying at the beginning, which it's like more of a relaxing or aesthetic piece that's just kind of like moving pictures. I forget who it is that said that. Was that Truffaut or someone like that? But yeah, it's just moving pictures.
Yeah, I guess I would agree with that. The irony is movies, I think, have gotten longer. Like
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember when... Oh, go ahead. Finish your thought.
No, like he was talking about My Girl Friday. Like, that movie's an hour and a half. Like, that movie's like 80 years old.
I was going to say, like, I remember when I was a kid, and if a movie was like over an hour and 20 minutes, it was considered like a long movie for me. But then, I mean, you have like Lord of the Rings or whatever, where these movies are absurdly long. And I feel like it's just, yeah, like you're saying, movies are just getting longer and people have just gotten used to it.
And that does kind of make them more of an event to go to the theater. If you go to the theater and watch like an hour and a half comedy, it's definitely like a way different. Like, do you really feel like you're getting the same quote unquote money's worth relative to watching like a 3-hour war epic? Although I don't know if people are really making that decision before they go to the theaters. Like, am I making enough money based on how entertained I am?
Right. A good example of that was when The Batman came out. And I saw that a bunch of people were raving about it. A bunch of people, recommended seeing it in theaters. And that, to me, was always going to be a movie I saw in theaters, but also because other people were recommending it, it made me want to go and like, I'm not necessarily pushing the narrative of do your own research, but I would use that in this context of do your own research, right? On the movie, where I watch it and experience it for myself and come to my own conclusions on it. I enjoy doing that. And maybe it feels like to me that we're getting away from that. Maybe we're getting away from that idea that people want to experience something for themselves and understand it and be able to explain what they feel about it. Just because you have so many people nowadays who just look up a movie, they look up the plot, and then they're like, oh, that sounds like a bad movie, I'm never going to watch it. Or it's like reading a 1 to 2 sentence summary about it, and they're like, okay, I understand the movie, I don't need to see it now. Like, I think so many people fall under that idea, even with books too. Like, you read a 1 to 2 page summary of it and you're like, okay, I got the gist. you can understand what happens, but like, not to sound cliche, but the experience itself, the journey is the piece of art and like what it means to you.
Oh, well,
The
yeah,
words.
if movie watching has fallen off, reading has fallen off a cliff.
Definitely.
Like, how many people do you think are really sitting down before they go to bed and like, maybe I should unwind some looking at a book and ignoring my phone and or ignoring the TV, rather than just, I'm just going to watch this TV until I fall asleep. I'll just fall asleep on the couch with the TV on.
I think a lot of that comes down to also like money. Like if you have more money, you have more time. And if you have more time, then you can spend it doing whatever it is that you want to do. And so if you have like less time, then you're like less inclined to just read for fun or like read on your own. I'm just more so thinking of this one guy that I discovered on YouTube that I'm watching to optimize my iPad, right? To set up like a proper workflow. He's a med student, right? He is trying to optimize his iPad in order to be optimized for him doing work, taking notes, and then reading. But he has like all of this, he has this workflow set up so that it is condensing down all of the quotes that he reads from essays, articles, anything online, and then also books that he's reading. But like clearly he's also reading like books for fun, as well as to learn something from them. But like that is extremely interesting to me, and that's something that I want to do, but I don't know how you get to wanting to do that unless you have time to do that with, which then you need money to do that.
I think everybody has some time somewhere in their day where they could do that rather than watching TV. It's just a choice. Like, the difference is reading isn't really a passive thing. Like, you have to pay some attention. Like, you can consume any visual content passively. Like, you never really have to engage with it. You can jump in and out, and what you'll get out of it will be dependent on how much of it you actually paid attention to. But I don't know. I don't know what TV shows people are watching now. Like, NCIS is still on the air, and NCIS has been running the same episode for 20 years. Like, it's just, a Marine is dead. Who killed him? And then they question someone, and they're like, well, this former Marine, and then 4 guys jump out, and they're like, there's no such thing as a former Marine. And I just, like, view all of those procedural cop dramas as the same, just with a different bent on, like, what form of the law they want to prop up in that any given episode.
It's funny you mention that, because a show that is not similar, but I guess the overall situation is similar, is The Wire, that I'm rewatching now with Anna. And yeah, it's got like a similar subject matter, but it just takes like a completely different perspective on it. And then the overall house that it builds is much, much different. And its goal clearly is much different than NCIS.
Well, yeah, The Wire is like completely gray. Like, it puts a shade of gray on all level of both authority and power. Like, the police are either corrupt or incompetent or unable to get things done because of some bureaucratic nightmare or just a power-hungry lunatic at the top. And then how that plays into like the stuff with the like Baltimore politics, and you know, the good guy who ends up being the mayor or whatever is still just ends up having to basically become a part of the swamp, like become a part of the corruption of the city. And that type of nuance is what makes The Wire stand out relative to every other, you know, Law and Order, SVU, NCIS, CSI. Because all of those end up being the same thing, which is kind of like this begrudging respect to systems of power that have to exist because there's evil in the world. You know, the like a few good men line, like, we need men on those walls.
Right.
It's just different levels of whether or not it says we have to have police here because crime exists, and you wouldn't want to live in a world with only crime, so we have to fight the bad people.
Yeah, another show that also fits into that, but does it in a different way would then be True Detective as well, which obviously is driving at much different ideas than The Wire and than NCIS, but like basically is the same as SVU.
In a
It's just
way,
shot. It's just like the material itself is the same, but the story is completely different and the characters as well.
yeah, because it does still paint the like those guys are unambiguously like the hero protagonists. They're just like how evil the world is around them corrupts them, but they're still deemed as necessary. I saw something once that described the first season of True Detective as two drunk cops fight elder gods. I thought that was a good description.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was driving at, is that there's something like very supernatural about that show and very like philosophical that it's driving towards, which most shows with that subject matter are not. uh they don't interact with the elder gods, or they're not like reaching into the ether to find something else. Like there's not a character of Cole there in most of those shows, which is why that show is so interesting. At least for me, like Cole makes the show for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's been plenty of like noir, neo noir detective stories that have that sort of fractured time narrative where they jump back and forth. Like, oh, we never solved the crime. How are we going to? And then it's you jump between the future and the past, and then it ends up just being the future or present or whatever you want to call it. And I agree with you. I think what makes that work is both that character, but also his relationship with I don't remember Woody Harrelson's character's name, but the two of them have amazing chemistry, and part of that is like, you son of a bitch, I hate you, but goddamn do I respect you. And that type of drunken ethos just propels the story along in the last few episodes, because it has a lot of slower moments. Like, they kind of methodically go through the mystery. And obviously all of those McConaughey monologues where he's just, I think we should walk hand in hand into the ocean, not reproduce, all of that stuff is just like confetti or sprinkles on the top.
Yeah, and then it like not culminates, but then it hits you with one of the best scenes that I've ever seen on television, which is just him going through in one shot in that crazy like neighborhood where he nearly dies like 5 times.
Oh yeah, I mean that's just really innovative use of camera work to make an interesting action scene. Like, TV just never had room for, long takes or big set pieces like that. That's maybe the one hope, is a lot of creative people moving into TV and just making really long-term stories operate well over 20 episodes rather than 3 hours in a movie.
Yeah, I think I mean TV has been under a revolution in, I guess you could say, the last 20 to 30 years. It's been changing a lot. I mean, streaming has certainly changed it quite a bit. But for me, also something else that I really look for in movies is like long takes. Like I just really appreciate those, sort of just allowing your brain to think about what's happening instead of just the constant like cuts. I certainly enjoy those movies that are cut well together, or not cut quickly together, but it's sort of like jarring and fast paced, like Snatch or something like that. But then that you mix in those long takes, and it really builds like quite an experience. So for me, I just appreciate like the long takes a lot.
Yeah, I think just in general, montage is like a crutch that you can use as a shortcut to piece together something visually. Like, it wasn't always common that montage was used. Now it's like everything. Like, you can just condense so much story into 2 minutes, 30 seconds if you want. 30 seconds to 2 minutes by just cramming together. And sometimes it's done to great effect. I think it's a lot harder to get away with fewer long takes and have it actually still be interesting. Because there are tons of movies that just can devolve into sheer boredom if they just don't cut ever, and you can tell that they did that because they didn't have the money to do anything but set the camera in one place and just say go.
Right, but if you have a Kurosawa level of understanding of how to have people move across a space and using color, then your long takes will just be perfect, and they will be moving canvases driving towards something incredible at like the introduction of like every single scene.
Oh yeah, but he was someone who like largely rejected the use of montage.
Well, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
But that style is almost entirely dead now, at least in American movies.
I guess maybe that's what I was driving at, is that's why I'm more into foreign films right now, at least. Is they're typically more of those long takes. And then Jackson mentioned Korean movies. There's one thing about Korean movies that always gets me, is that the movie starts out as one thing, and then halfway or 2/3 of the way, it is just a completely different movie. And you're like, what the hell am I watching now? Like, this is not at all what I thought would be happening, or not where I thought the character would go.
Yeah, I think the Koreans and the Japanese are way better at like genre fusion than Americans. Like, Americans usually, it's a big deal when the movie has, some big twist that changes what type of movie it is halfway through or 2/3 of the way through. Whereas most of the time there's like a really strong adherence to one genre. I mean, I honestly think that's part of why Jordan Peele's movies have hit at the right time. Because I haven't seen Nope yet, but at least for us and Get Out, like, both of those are, quote unquote horror movies, but they go about it in a very different way. And both, like, take the genre and flip it on its head at some point.
Yes, I saw Nope, and they do something similar, but also completely different from like the other two. So you should, yeah, it was a pretty different experience, but it was definitely like going after the horror thing and then just completely changed it. So you should watch it and let me know what you think.
I'm pissed I didn't see that yet. I meant to see it in theaters, and it just didn't get around to it. That would be a really fun episode to do, is just all of Jordan Peele's movies.
Yeah, that'd be really fun. Yeah, I was gonna say with Nope, I saw it in theaters. It was not at all what I expected. I'm still not quite sure how I feel about it. So I'm curious what you guys think.
Yeah, that was kind of why I didn't, like, I was hyped for it to come out, and then it came out, and everyone was really divided on just, I think, how odd the movie was. Like, they weren't expecting it to be as wacky as it is. Because it sounds like...
That's probably going to make me like it that much more, honestly. The wackiness.
I mean, that's exactly what it was. It was just like, you go in expecting it to be like, kind of like the other ones or whatever, like a pretty, like, his style, then it was wacky.
Well, if you watch enough Key and Peele, like, that's what makes Get Out surprising, because you don't expect someone who did Key and Peele to make something as, like, well thought out as Get Out, or something that ends up being as serious as it is. Whereas, like, Us has those moments where you're like, all right, there's Peele's voice, that's him coming through the whole way. But yeah, I could be wrong. Maybe Americans are better at genre than I think, but in general, I think that it's used as like this has to fit into this genre, and that's just the way we're going to write it. That's the way we're going to make it.
So you're saying the genre then, because they're throwing it in that box, then they cut certain things or they make it fit that genre, which then sacrifices the story, whereas other people are making a story and it's just that story. Like, they're not worried, they're not as concerned about genre, they're just doing a service to whatever the story is.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you can play in it and subvert it at any level that you want to. I think Americans are good at that to a certain extent, but
I think like the big thing too is like I feel like Americans like to basically like figure out who their audience is and kind of make it for that audience and know that they're looking for like a very specific thing
Yeah.
and they try to hit that versus like the Korean films and the Japanese films. It's like it doesn't really feel like they're aiming it for the audience. They're just kind of like what Reese was saying. We're trying to tell this story and then kind of hope that the audience comes along.
Yeah, that is one of my least favorite creative decisions you can make, or lack of decisions, is just throwing up your hands and saying we'll just put it to the committee, and the committee is vaguely the audience.
I'd be very interested to see how many movies are on the quote unquote top 100 list that used a committee or something like that. And then how many of those movies were just one or two people's vision.
Well, you won't find many that are just one or two people, like by and large, but you will find definitely a lot of committee, stuff where they had to market test it before it was finished. It depends on what list you're looking at. Like if you're looking for a compendium of best movies, then you either end up with the ones where it's the same 15 foreign movies from the 50s, and then at the top is Godfather and Citizen Kane. Or if you look at more American lists, then you see like Lord of the Rings, Forrest Gump, Fight Club. Those are always there.
Dear God.
Forrest Gump.
I think you have just enabled me to see the error in that movie. Just from our conversations that we had, I think I've seen it maybe twice or three times, but yeah. I mean, I've enjoyed watching the movie. There's complete non sequitur here, but Jackson, have you seen Prisoners?
That sounds super familiar.
It's with Jake Gyllenhaal and huge,
oh yeah,
jacked man.
Something with their daughters. The daughter gets taken or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a nice Thanksgiving movie to watch this week. Good movie about family.
That movie, for whatever reason, popped into my head. Maybe it's because I'm going over tragedy with my students. But I'm curious to know, like, I'm curious to know where great movies nowadays that are being made fall into with tragedy. Like, how many tragic elements are involved in movies that are coming out right now? Just because I think that there are a lot of movies nowadays that are coming out that you could call either tragedies or they have a ton of elements of tragedy to them. And I just think that the tragedy itself, the more elements that you have, the sort of like deeper the story is, and also the more depth there is to the character. And then you also have more of a response on the audience's part. But I have no idea. I would need to do more research on that.
I don't know if tragedies are specifically that popular now, but if they're not now, they probably will be in, 10, 15 years. Like, it's just an enduring type of story that we never really get tired of.
I don't mean a tragedy per se. I more so mean like tragic elements. Where like the character is good, right? They are a good character. Or they are like noble, right? And they set out on this whatever, not journey, because that makes it sound like a hero's journey. And then they have some type of reckoning, a turn of events, and then through that it's due to their tragic flaw or due to the circumstances, and then they realize that they are in a tragedy themselves. And then things go poorly for them because of that. And you, to varying degrees, you have where things go poorly for them, and then either they're able to overcome it or what have you. But hitting some of those elements, I think a lot of movies do that.
I was going to say, to answer that question that you posed in the beginning, I feel like an element or things I like in a movie is, and I think you kind of said this too, Reese, but basically when you go in thinking a character is good or whatever, and then all of a sudden you learn more about the character or you learn more about the world, and it completely changes like the values of like if you think that character is a truly good character or not, and then to see what they do in certain situations to see if if they're evil or if they're good. That's like a type of thing that I really enjoy in movies, where it questions like their concept of if they're good or bad, and then also questions like my concept if I think that they are good or bad.
Definitely, because most people would consider themselves to be a quote unquote good person, and most of the time that's the case in the movie, is that they also consider themselves to be moral. But then either they do something or something happens to them, and then they either need to rationalize that they are still good or that they had to do it because the ends justify the means. And yeah, building off of that also, I think a real turning point in my understanding of movies and just stories in general is that I didn't have to like the character or consider them to be good in order to enjoy the movie. And like once I overcame that and kind of understood that, I started enjoying way more movies. I have no idea how old I was, but I think a lot of people struggle with that. Maybe is that they're like, oh well, this person is clearly not good. I don't like this movie. And you're like, oh, okay, can we like move past that fact? Like, that's not what the movie is about.
My brother and I were just talking about good and bad for characters, and talking about like um, how like the audience kind of roots for a character who's going through and does like all these bad things, and they're kind of like the main character. The audience roots for that character to, oh, you know what, they've done all these bad things, but they're going to turn their life around. They're going to start doing all these like good things or be like good at the end. Um, and we were talking about how much like, not kind of, I guess kind of like what you're saying, like you don't have to like the character. They don't have to like turn their life around. They don't have to turn around in the situation and be good, because that's just not how life kind of works. But I feel like everyone wants, or not everyone, but I feel like a lot of people who sit down and watch movies, like my wife, she loves like a happy ending or something where the character does something that's good at the end. Like that's really all she's kind of hoping for in a movie, typically.
Yeah, I think that actually gets at an idea that we've sort of, no pun intended here, circled around, which is that we do really like when things circle back around and they come to that sort of like idea of everything is tied together nicely. We know exactly what happens with this character because it makes us feel then good, and it gives us then hope that we ourselves can then bring our life full circle, or that we can see everything come to fruition. And there's a lot of great emotion with that. I don't want to say that that's not something a movie should do. But I think if you are only focused on that, then you're missing out on a whole host of other ideas and a whole host of other pieces of art that then challenge your understanding of life and your understanding of the world. So yeah, I mean, there's the idea of denouement or denouement. I don't know how it's pronounced, but basically that at the end of the story, it falls apart or is tied up nicely or tied up neatly together. And obviously that depends on the overarching story or certain subplots, but that also is a piece of narrative or tragedy as well.
I think people prefer the tragedy now that doesn't necessarily befall the main character. Like it's a side character who's more morally gray, who ends up doing something or sacrificing themselves, and that tragedy's impact on the main character is what we like. Because then we end up with the happy ending, with the bittersweet part being that, whatever this other sacrifice was consumed this other now redeemed character.
Is that because we can't handle it? Like we need that tertiary level of detachment. Watching a character on screen, we can't handle them have the tragedy. You need a further level of like detachment so that the secondary character is the one that it befalls. So that in our own lives we're like, oh man, that sucks that happened to my friend, or that sucks that happened to a family member. But at least my life is going well. Obviously, that's simplifying it drastically, but
That could be it. I don't know. We just really like superheroes as gods, like heroes as gods, rather than heroes as like the one that like for all the characters that go through all those Marvel movies, the only one they killed was Iron Man, which was like the crux of 20 movies. Like it was all leading up to just one guy sacrificing himself.
Yeah, yeah, I feel like you're right, Nolan, because I was just trying to think about like when have I seen like the main character die, and like the biggest thing that I mean, Iron Man, I guess, is a good one, but I was thinking like I Am Legend. Like I felt like that was just like a pretty crazy movie. The fact that Will Smith ended up dying, like I thought for sure he wasn't gonna die. Or if you guys watch like Rogue One or something like that, that's like a similar thing where it's like it's not really done. Um, but when it is done and it's done well, it's like a really fulfilling movie experience, I think. At least for me.
yeah, I mean, for me, it makes you think more, and it's way more impactful. I just finished teaching 1984, which arguably the main character dies at the end, assumedly, and if he doesn't physically die, he's mentally shot, like he's completely mentally done because he loves Big Brother. But a lot of students, we finished reading it in class, and I could see on their faces they were like, "That's it, wow, great." And it's like, yeah, initially that's what you're left feeling or left thinking, but I agree, Jackson. I kind of like those stories more. And what one student actually asked me, um, do these types of stories like need to end darkly, or is it possible for them to end in a different way and have such an impact? And I was like, honestly, I don't know. I don't know if they are able to end differently and still have as much of an impact.
It's a cautionary tale, 1984. So like all those type, like not to say that anything that's like political or moralizing needs to necessarily end negatively, but oftentimes they do. Like that type of work like just tends to be darker at the end because it's trying to give you caution, like it's trying to give weight to its message.
Right, right.
Like what I find more the like the idea of redemption is just a really strong emotion, and the ones that are as strong end up being like I mean it's the reason romance movies are still semi popular, if not just outright still very popular, because there's like a sense of closure in the completeness of a relationship.
Right.
Like that redemption story that you get a lot from at least more modern tragedies, like where a character is redeemed by their sacrifice or what they give up to, the sacrifice becomes the tragedy. Like that feeling you get from seeing like a very satisfying redemption, I think you get the same thing from like revenge stories, even though that's like a completely different feeling. But revenge, those types of movies have been insanely popular, and I mean they're some of my favorite. Like Tarantino movies have definitely been the more popular ones as of late, but those are all focused on revenge, and a lot of the revenge feels really satisfying, like in a similar vein to the way that like tragic sacrifice feels satisfying. Revenge just usually ends up being much more bitter and more violent.
Yeah, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a reasonable example of that, especially given the context of that story. Because going into it, you want to know, like, all right, well, Tarantino did this. How is like, what's the payoff going to be here? Jackson, have you seen that, by the way?
I actually haven't.
Okay, I won't say any more then.
I think you're. I can.
uh,
I can go on mute.
no. It's just like because of before you watch the movie, I would actually look up like what happened to the character, like what happened to the person, in real life.
Oh, before.
Yeah. You should you should know like um what happened in history. Yeah. But yeah, I would agree with with that. I think revenge stories is something that will always be popular in a lot of ways. Um, is a revenge story the opposite of a tragedy?
A lot of revenge stories are tragedies.
Right, for various characters, I guess.
I would say the feeling of revenge is maybe the opposite of redemption. Because redemption is like a selfless act meant, completely to ignore something that might be beneficial to you in favor of someone else. Whereas revenge is like an entirely self-serving act meant to satisfy some hole that is within you for whatever reason.
Where does redemption fit with tragedy?
I'm saying a lot of the more modern examples of tragedy where a character's sacrifice is tragic, but it's redemption for something else.
I see what you're saying. So a more modern take on that is there's some redemptive quality to their tragic decision. Yeah.
That
makes sense.
Like the easy example that we already mentioned is like Iron Man dying at the end of the end game. And the redemption is basically how he's, kind of a billionaire douchebag a lot of the time. Like he's an asshole to everyone. And he even gets called out a few times with like, you'll never, give yourself up to help other people. And then he just, makes everyone eat those words because he turns out to be the guy willing to die to make sure that the completely objectively good guys beat the mustache twirling purple man. Like it might cheapen the example some because it's just morally such a simple example, but
I don't think it cheapens it. I mean, I think it's a great payoff for someone like myself who is not the biggest Marvel fan. I certainly felt very moved by that culmination.
Have either of you seen American History X?
Yes.
Because that one I think is like right down the middle of being both about redemption and about revenge.
Yeah. What a film. The more that I think about that one scene from the movie, I don't know if I can like really watch again, but yeah.
I've only seen it once. Like it is a tough movie to get through.
So then, interesting. I wonder if there's like, I don't pose these questions necessarily because I feel like they have to be answered. It's more so, I think a lot of people kind of in our society, they have like checklists or they have like top lists of things of like, oh, these are my top things, or for a movie to be good, it needs to hit these bullet points or these check marks. So I'm curious. I wonder what check marks a movie needs to hit for it to be great in our opinions. And then also you could rank those check marks too. Which check mark is at the top?
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like I have a bunch of like different lists for my tops, like kind of depend on my mood or like what I'm kind of searching for. So I'm kind of thinking about like what's like the what's the Venn diagram, what's the middle section of all of them.
Yeah, it definitely depends on mood. For my, like, I don't know, maybe top 5 checklists for what a movie must possess, story is probably up there. Story and character, and then just like probably, like, for lack of a better term, like grossness of shots. Like if it just has like disgustingly incredible shots, then like I'm just fully engrossed in the movie. Like the story doesn't even like need to be like anything incredible. Like if you can pull it off with like incredible shots, then I'm just completely drawn in. So then story would take a back seat for that, for me at least. Then you get into like aesthetics, emotions.
Yeah, I don't know, if I was to list like just 100 movies I really like, like just my 100 favorite or so, I'm sure the main consistent thing amongst all of them would be like humanity's grappling with its own flaws, like especially like just our ability to descend into madness, or how we fight against like unstoppable terrors, whether that is in the form of like horror movies or war movies or, you know, revenge, like action movies.
So then you're talking theme, basically.
Yeah, so theme is
moral.
probably, yeah, still important to me. But like the visual element has to be there as well. But that's where it becomes more subjective. Because like you can have a movie that's just objectively about a dude going insane. Like The Shining is like one of my favorite movies just all the time. And that, it, you know, you can describe that really easily. Like a hotel possessed by some kind of evil makes a man go crazy or helps a man go crazy. But on top of that, there's like, you know, levels to the visual narrative that the movie itself doesn't even address. Like what it's showing you visually is never really talked about in the context of like this man's descent into madness. So I like movies where there's usually some kind of visual element. Like there's something subtextual that is either like indescribable, like you just have to make something of it for yourself, or it just points somewhere differently than what you're just on the surface seeing.
Yeah, that's a big one for me. I really like when they don't have to spell everything out for you or don't spell everything out for you and they leave it for up to interpretation or for, you know, for you to pick up on it by yourself. I feel like that's a really important quality that I really enjoy in movies. Also, the thing, like, I'm having a tough time thinking about, like, what else, like, with my Venn diagram, but the big thing for me is, like, the tractors that are in movies. It takes away so much from, I guess, me enjoying a film. So that could be, like, if the acting's, like, not good, or if, like, you know, the filming was done, like, really poorly, or, you know, the music choice that they threw in, like, completely just, like, takes it away. Like, just detractors in movies are, like, my biggest, uh, yeah, the things that take it away from being a great movie.
Hmm. I think this would be a really fun exercise to do, is to come up with the check marks that a movie has to hit, and then also like sort of overlaying that list on top of our favorite movies, and then seeing like, okay, which ones can break the rules and they do it really well, and like which of them are able to break those rules.
Yeah.
I think that would be really fun to do. And yeah, Jackson, you're spot on. There's so many movies out there that are like, if they just tweaked like a few elements, it would definitely be dancing into the great category. But then, yeah, the acting or the story, like, especially endings for me as a writer are difficult to do. But then also, like, as a critic, it's easy for you to be like, oh, that ending could have been better.
But then it's like,
yeah,
you can hang a whole mediocre narrative on like a great ending. You can also stretch out one great ending into a whole movie, like Memento. Like that just flips the entire idea on its head, because you know how it ends, but it's how it gets there that's interesting. But in like such a weird reverse way. Because like not only by the end are you convinced that he's the villain rather than the hero, but like the guy you thought was the villain was kind of the hero. And but there are also like the endings of those movies where the ending makes you have to rewatch the movie different. Like that's why The Prestige is so good, because like knowing the ending makes every subsequent rewatch completely different, because you're wondering when each person knew what they knew, and then you're also wondering like, oh well, the filmmakers knew everything from the beginning, so how does that change it? And then you just start to see like every little bit of information is super intentional. So all of the timing is just perfect.
Yeah, and that's done to varying successes with movies that I like as well, where clearly it was painstakingly constructed, but then the movie itself is not incredible. Like Wes Anderson, I would argue, is extremely painstaking with well, I wouldn't argue that. He just is painstaking with his shots, with his characters, with his sets, with his costumes, with whatever it is. But I wouldn't say all of his movies are incredible. And I wouldn't put a lot of his movies on my top lists. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, how do you put all of that into something where it's not in disarray and it's not just a confluence of, it's a movie, it's a narrative. What makes it great? So maybe that's something we should do. I'd like to do that.
Right now?
No, not right now. No. That would take too long, I think.
Describe it one more time so I can try to like write or type it out.
I wrote it down, but
okay, cool.
Basically, if you want to write it down as well, that'll help my own understanding of it. But a checklist of each narrative or film part, and then overlaying that, like a list of our top film pieces.
Rules that most of them will follow, and then picking out movies that specifically break them to some effect.
Like film facets that must be utilized for a film to be great. And then looking at our favorite films and seeing how well they hit those boxes or don't hit those boxes. It's kind of just like putting it into a quantitative analysis.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I'm curious if there going to be any outliers, that completely don't follow the checklist that we come up with.
Yeah, and I think each of us may have our own checklist, and they might be similar. But yeah, I mean, for me, as Nolan said, I think theme is really big. And then it's probably like shots.
For me, probably editing is like number 2. Like how it gets paced, and that's what turns me off to a lot of like big, especially like what, as I call it, like by committee movies, where you can tell that they like the pacing and flow is chopped up and recut and edited down in a way where like only the content is really what's being pressed as important, not the time in which it's delivered, or even the order in which it's delivered.
That might match up with what Jackson was talking about with detractions as well as detractors.
Yeah, I'm just saying that would, like, pacing issues is like easily a number 2 detractor for me. Maybe even number 1, where it's like if theme is something that I like the most, a lack of theme or discordant themes doesn't bother me as much.
I see what you're saying.
So like an example would be Us. Like Us is just a recent one I can think of where I find the themes.
I actually haven't seen that.
Well, without spoiling it, basically like it bounces around a few different themes, and the narrative doesn't necessarily quote unquote conclude. Like you're not left with a big sense of closure, and the themes don't necessarily play well together, but the whole movie is just interesting and it works, and I still feel satisfied by the end.
I'm like, I don't really care if you ruin that movie.
It has a lot of elements where it jumps between being like a very serious like psychological drama, and then kind of like elements of a family drama and family horror, and then just outright campy horror. And that's like not even necessarily like the narrative jumps between those things as well. And so they don't really play together very nice. Like the climax has elements of each one, and the way it bounces through them makes you question how it will end, and then it ends in a, at least to me, completely different way than you might expect. And I liked that.
Yeah, I think in building our website as well, I'd like to sort of put out some of our own like documents that we come up with just in relation to film as well. Just as we continue this journey of the podcast. Links, what have you. At some point, maybe in the next like 10 or 20 episodes, I would like to get into some discussions, more fun discussions, I think, than, not that this wasn't fun, sorry. More so like creative discussions around At this point, 2 hours in, that's where my brain is at. Inspector Collings, Nolan.
Oh yeah.
I would love to talk about that character and the ideas that we have for that.
We'll just turn this into a narrative radio show where we like live broadcast. We'll just build like The Shadow, that old radio show.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just gonna do that, but with that character instead. The
Oh my
opposite
God.
of The Shadow. Instead of being a serious, hard-boiled, like magic detective, a la Batman, it's a Jeffrey Lebowski knockoff.
I don't know if you feel comfortable talking about it and us posting it, but I would like to tell Jackson the idea.
Oh, go for it.
We don't have to post this. Basically, we came up with, like, Nolan and I really like Sherlock Holmes. So we came up with, like, almost an inverted Sherlock Holmes where he's just a raging alcoholic who is, like, a hard-boiled detective who, like, not luck, but through, like, his unconscious detective capabilities, he's able to solve, like, mysteries. But he is just, like, continuously at, like, multiple points in time derailed by his own alcoholism and, like, struggle with whatever else he's dealing with in his like, from his past or what have you.
So like his demons are like the biggest attractor away from him like solving stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
Gotcha. Yeah, that sounds cool. I like that.
And it's definitely going to be a mix of, like, sort of like fun, like Knives Out, mystery, hopefully done in a better way than Knives Out, even though we did shit on that the last episode. At least I did.
Did you talk about his accent?
No, I just like the, like, aesthetic of Knives Out, and I like the mystery of it, but then I want it to also be, like, funny, like Nolan said, like the dude from The Big Lebowski. So, like, you're just laughing at him and also with his like ridiculousness. But yeah, I think it would be fun to come up with ideas for the different short stories that we have for him that would turn into potential longer form stories, but then record them as we're, like, writing them,
Yeah, I think it'd be cool to listen to your writing process, and like as you guys like get more and more like further along on it, it'd be kind of cool, especially for you guys probably to look back and see like what you guys were talking about or what you're kind of thinking about, things like that.
Yeah, and I mean, you're more than welcome to join us for some of those, or we could honestly, I had another idea for certain episodes where after we're done recording something like this, because at this point, like, I feel like we pretty much tied up this episode, but moving into, like, a non sequitur, like, half hour where, like, we're in the, like, flow space of conversation and ideas, and you just kind of are like, oh, I just had this idea, what if we did a story on this, and this, and then we just kick around those ideas and then write them down, and if we use them, great. If we don't use them, great.
Yeah, sounds cool. Like a little round table type thing at the end.
Exactly.